Did you have time? Thanks. Have fun.
Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Lynchburg. We're glad you're here this morning. I'm still getting emails from people who are like, I can't be there today, I'm on my way to Pennsylvania. So I'm really hoping the whole, state of Pennsylvania doesn't sink into the core of the earth. Whoever you are, whatever your beliefs, whatever your age, and whomever you love, you are welcome here. As we work together for justice, compassion, and peace, we also acknowledge with humility that our buildings sit on Monacan land. My name is Terry Bailiff. I'm the professional minister of this congregation, but I share the ministry with all of the members and friends of this congregation. If you're with us for the first time, we're glad you chose to be here this morning to participate in this service for our congregation we love. If you would like to receive our monthly newsletter and Friday email updates, please fill out the virtual visitor card found on our website at uulynchburg.org under Sunday services, or you can fill out the yellow card in the back of the seat in front of you. And then you can put it in the offering basket during the service. Today, our children have gone directly to their classes. We will return next week for our usual time for all ages. This Tuesday at 7 p.m., we'll be viewing via Zoom the Oscar Award-winning documentary 20 Days in Mariupol, which focuses on the Ukraine war. Be in touch with Makana Morris, who's on Zoom today, or Bob Morris, who is in the back, if you want more information to participate in an insightful conversation about the movie. Next week, Dick Bain and I are going to explore the question, what would it do to our understanding of ourselves and the world if we found out aliens really were real? So Dick and I are having fun planning for this. A particular welcome to Davion Washington. We've missed him, and I'm so glad you could be back after he's finishing up his master's and then on to a PhD. So we claim you wherever you live. So, yeah. Now I invite us to release our worries about our world and our own lives as we enter into the service by taking a few slow, calming breaths. As we join together, I invite our roomies in here to wave good morning to our Zoomies. And Gary is there, and he's already in Pennsylvania. And Zoomies, wave
Ohio.
roomies. Ohio. It's great to be together. May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to assist and not to curse, to serve you, O Spirit of life. Our opening reading is by the Reverend Gretchen Haley. We belong to each other. We are keepers of hope, holders of memory, storytellers and song weavers, putting on this thread of truth, this other march of history that might otherwise fail to find its footing. That life is filled with kindness, bold beauty, courageous compassion, sacrifice for the common good, and a wide willingness to embrace neighbors and strangers as kin. We are here to do the work of hope, remembering the past, remembering ourselves, imagining our most possible future for this life that teeters too often on the edge of forgetting. We belong to each other. Bring all you are, every shadow and every light, every hope, every fear, for this radiant hour. Come, let us be hope for each other. I invite us to rise in body or spirit as we share hymn 347 in the gray hymnal. Rise as you are willing and able. Each Sunday, we take an offering of our gifts for the work of this community, both within our congregation and in the larger world. And okay, here we come. Okay, thank you. A few years ago, I read a quote by Bishop Desmond Tutu, and it introduced me to the concept of Ubuntu. And I think there's now an Ubuntu computer program or something, I don't know. But I really like the philosophy and have held it in my heart ever since I read this quote by Bishop Tutu. One of the sayings in our country is Ubuntu, the essence of being human. Ubuntu speaks particularly about the fact that you can't exist as a human being in isolation. It speaks about our interconnectedness. You can't be human all by yourself. And when you have this quality, Ubuntu, you are known for your generosity. We think of ourselves far too frequently as just individuals, separated from one another, whereas you are connected and what you do affects the whole world. When you do it well, it spreads out. It is for the whole of humanity. Our tradition is to share together the joys and the concerns in our lives. And if you have a joy or concern, love, we give thanks for the wonder and mystery and beauty of life. We hold up our responsibility to learn the truth of our history, to acknowledge ways in which people within our culture have suffered and have died. We hold up all those who work for justice and peace, both within this country and in our human family. We hold up those who are sick in mind, body, or spirit. May they find healing and wholeness. We give thanks for those struggles in life which we resist, but later discover that they have something we need to learn about ourselves. May we make peace with all the aspects of our being so that we will have the strength and the foresight and the commitment to do our work in the world so that together we might build the beloved community. This we ask in the name of all that is holy. Amen. Thank you, Emily. That's one of my favorites. Davion, it's wonderful to welcome you home, and I look forward to learning more about your research. So thank you for being here.
Just want to say it's an absolute pleasure to be back home, truly. I would say that there are a lot of new faces, but the people that are new faces to me are probably like, you're the new face. So it's just good to see you all. I currently have I'm getting to fulfill my dream of teaching collegiate sociology. And I teach Soc 202, Intro to Sociology, at North Carolina State University in the Sociology and Anthropology department. And yesterday I was speaking with Ash, who is new to sociology. But second week of class, this is a little bit of sociology for you. Second week of class, I asked my students, last week, why did no one fight over a seat? First week of class, everybody came in, picked a seat. Why did no one fight over a seat? Why didn't no one fight over a seat in here? Anybody want to know what the students came to the conclusion of? Because there are enough seats. There are enough seats. and so each and every day I come to class, I tell my students, y'all probably think I'm a communist or whatever else, but if I can't impress anything enough to you, it's the fact that there are enough seats. Always. We have been socialized and conditioned in our society to live with this scarcity mentality, this idea that there's not enough, this capitalistic idea that there's only so much to go around. And that's how we end up in so many of our conflicts today. I want to reinforce the idea that there are enough seats, there's enough land, there's enough money, there's enough resources for everyone. I also want to acknowledge that the independent city of Lynchburg, Virginia, and its green spaces occupy stolen land in what is now recognized as the Piedmont region of Virginia, which is the ancestral land of the Monacan Indian Nation. I also want to acknowledge the labor that has gone into this land, whether it be monetized, volunteered, indentured, so on and so forth. I think it's one thing to acknowledge the land and acknowledge the labor. I think it's another thing to provide monetary reparations for those who provided said labor and to give land back to those who are indigenous to said land. I have this dream, this wild and radical dream of an American populace, so radical in the love that we exude and exhibit, like in our very congregation, so radical in the love that they exhibit, that radical enough that we can not only convince ourselves, but convince the world that there are enough seats. And so with that, I just want to say, my name is Davion Washington, Jr. I am a master's student in sociology at North Carolina State University. I'm a member of this congregation. Wherever I go, y'all can't get rid of me, to Terry's point. So I will say that one thing I definitely am learning is as you go to different places in different cities, the bigger the populace, the less communal sometimes things can be. And that sometimes even is in reference to some of our UU friends elsewhere. So as we continue to grow in this idea of the fact that there are enough seats, we can also welcome others with the intention of creating a safe space and a loving space for everyone. Um, so in my field of sociology, my concentration specifically is in race, racism, and anti-racism. And luckily enough for you all, you guys get to get basically the background, the super background story version of my thesis defense, if you will. And so I specifically talk about Black perspectives on white racial allyship. And I want to start by giving some stories and some background about how I arrived here at this point. And so we think back to even before 2020, but specifically summer of 2020, authors Levine Raskin and Ghaffar Siddiqui, in an article titled "White Allyship Means a Transfer of Power," specifically coined this period of 2020, 2019 as the Great Awakening. So for all those that might remember more contemporarily, all my internet users, I saw like a crazy Twitter clip from TikTok. Anybody remember like all the white people like bowing down to the Black people, like we're so sorry for our racism? Like 2020 was a very wild time. But this period of the Great Awakening really put an enhanced lens on the necessary work of white allies. And specifically around this time, following the deaths of, or the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin, and others, this period of the Great Awakening really saw a resurgence in the Black Lives Matter movement, which originally started after the murder of Trayvon Martin. This was a difficult time. I remember not only was COVID was going on, I was here in Lynchburg. Um, I was the only one on campus, living on campus during COVID during the summer here in Lynchburg. I got to, see Fifth and Federal get closed down and all these different things taking place. But something happened to where mass white guilt kind of showed up. And let's start here. Who was a part of a book club in 2020? Who was a part of a book club on race in 2020? Oh yeah, okay.
Bob, you were in there too, weren't you?
So a lot of people started book clubs. Luckily for y'all, the book club here was my idea, but a lot of people started book clubs as a result of this white guilt, this white discomfort, as they were seeing what was going on in the media. And so at the time, I was part of student government. I was student government president at University of Lynchburg, and our student government advisor over the summer recommended that we as a student government start a book club. And we read this book right here called White Fragility: Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism. Many of you know, I became enamored with this book and at the things that were being highlighted, specifically thinking about how nice and well-meaning white people can and do still continue to perpetuate racial harm, specifically towards communities of color, even when they mean well or they mean the best. So I started this, I read this book, and then I had the honor of leading a group with many of you all here on white fragility. And it was probably one of the highlights of my time here and being able to spend some time with you all. We all grew throughout that time. And one of the biggest things that we were faced with was this challenge of no pain, no gain. So I always tell people, prepare to be uncomfortable. Or when we're having conversations about race and whiteness and things like that. When we go to the gym and we work out and we lift weights, we tear muscle to build muscle, and it's a continuous cycle. We don't grow comfortable by putting ourselves in comfortable positions. We grow comfortable with the uncomfortable by putting ourselves in positions to mold, to be fluid, to grow. And so I led the White Fragility Book Club, and it was a great time. Also during this year, I completed my undergraduate thesis specifically on the lived experiences of Black and African American students using a Dimensions of Wellness framework. And I was accepted into North Carolina State University as a PhD student in sociology. Now, since 2021 through now, a lot has happened, I will say. And so before getting into anything else, I want to talk about specifically dealing with contemporary race issues as a contemporary race scholar. As a scholar of race currently, it is the most taxing, exhausting. Who all has a race scholar friend on Facebook? Who all has a wannabe race scholar friend on Facebook? Okay, so y'all are perfect. Everybody on Facebook and social media, I get into a fight at least once a week with people that think they know what they're talking about, because everybody has an opinion on race, but not everybody has a sociological perspective on race to understand what race even is. Ta-Nehisi Coates specifically states that race is the son of racism and not the father. So specifically thinking about how we continue to other and separate others as whiteness is constructed. So professionally, in dealing with issues of race, it can be difficult, especially working in a higher ed space where you're advocating for a number of different people. Personally, it has also been difficult, very, very difficult. And I say all this because it contributes to kind of what started this project. So specifically, unfortunately, Terry has had to be with me through some of my past relationships, and terrible.
And I'm still driving a white woman car.
Still, okay. I was gonna get to that. I was gonna ask. So, first of all, studying race as a Black man in America, you have your lived experience, and you also have your literature that you review. Studying race as a Black man, when you try to talk to people about what you study, sometimes people take offense to it immediately. I got my ex's mother a copy of White Fragility. When me and my ex broke up, her stepfather called me and cussed me out because I sent her mother a copy of White Fragility and said, when you sent that book, I had an issue with that. His wife was white. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. I was just trying to share a piece of me with you, you know? In addition to that, got into a fight with my father in September because I told him that Donald Trump was a racist. So that's all, you always get, like, there's always something fun, like, about just being, like, that was like probably the easiest thing as a race scholar I could have said. That was like low-hanging fruit. Donald Trump is racist. And they hit me, how? It's always something. But lastly, what really kind of spurred this project, this wasn't even my original thesis. So my original thesis was specifically thinking about hate crimes on college campuses and racial threat theory. And that was all until I dealt with racial gaslighting at the hands of a well-meaning white person in my own program that I that caught me off guard. Now it no longer does. Nothing seems to no longer surprise me. And that's also something that you'll hear from many of the participants of this study. But I dealt with racism in my own program. And then furthermore, I dealt with racial gaslighting to really make me question the reality of things, if what happened really had happened. And it got to a point where I sat down with my advisor and these exact words came out of my mouth. Jim, I'm tired of white people. Tired. I say that like I haven't been going around telling everybody I'm about to go see my favorite white people this Sunday. But anyways, so specifically Kim, my advisor, brought up this idea about elevating Black voices and filling gaps of prior studies on white allyship. Because specifically, most prior studies on white allyship focus on white perspectives and white formation of allyship. So specifically, Clark in 2019 talked about and uncovered the narratives of 14 self-identified social media users, part of a larger interracial group of self-identified online social actors who use the Black Lives Matter hashtag as a part of online activism. So thinking about specifically Clark's article talks about white folks' work and the necessary work that white people do, specifically in using social media activism. Williams and colleagues specifically did a study consisting of 31 white individuals who participated in the behavioral task known as the interpersonal racial allyship scale, or the IRIS, of the largest study. The results indicated that meaningful white allyship is low based on how this scale measured what meaningful allyship was. Broido in 2000 examined how 6 white undergraduate students became social justice allies during college and how they understood their development. Ford and Ellen Orlandella explored the following research question, which at the conclusion of the dialogue, specifically between, they had intragroup and intergroup dialogues with Black and white students. They asked, how do white students conceptualize their white racial identity in relation to ally development and motivation to engage in anti-racist action? In reading The Signs by Hesford actually did a field study where she went around her neighborhood and went around the neighborhoods all throughout her town and looked at yard signs. In this house, we believe Black Lives Matter, women's rights, the yard signs, the typical, we have a big one on top. So typically thinking about how yard signs can often be a sign of performative white allyship. And then lastly, my greatest inspiration about white allyship being from white perspectives is Dr. D'Angelo herself. In 2021, Perry and I have been talking about starting something on this one. Dr. D'Angelo came out with a second book titled Nice Racism, in which she speaks to how progressive white people perpetuate racial harm. And even more, she responds to a lot of the criticism that she received from white fragility. And that criticism also contributes to this literature and inspires this study. You see, Dr. D'Angelo's work on white allyship is a prime example of white allyship from a white perspective. Many of the reviews or many of the feedback and criticism that Dr. D'Angelo received specifically was that these are just books of Robin DiAngelo recanting and restating her own past racisms and perpetuance of racial harm against the allies, the people that she's been allied to. While she uses herself as an example of how to be a better ally or how to not perpetuate racial harm while being well-meaning, she still continues to use herself as the example and talk about her own past iterances of racism. And so that was something that was, as a Black man who was going around like, have you read White Fragility? I love this book, I love this book. And then like getting to the sociology department and people are like questioning the validity of the work, you know, as in this book, it was like, I made this book my whole personality, guys. Like, I don't like. So I wanted to reify this idea that white allies can and still do perpetuate racial harm, deal with white fragility. I wanted to uplift Black voices in doing so. Because very few studies specifically ask Black people what they think and feel about allies. And so the methods for this study consisted of 12 Black and African American college students across various disciplines of undergraduate and graduate studies, specifically at NC State University. I utilized in-depth, semi-standardized interviews. And so I do qualitative work. I do interviews, I do open-ended interviews, but I like for all of my interviews, semi-standardized means I have an interview guide, which is instructions or like a layout, but I'm able to deviate from said interview guide freely. I really like my interviews to be conversational, especially they become very much more familial because of the racial dynamics within the conversations that we have. I utilize purposive and snowball sampling. Specifically, purposive sampling allows me as the researcher to kind of narrow down the field of what participants I'm looking for to be a part of the studies. Participants specifically had to identify as Black and or African American, and also have some form of racial justice or student leadership involvement on campus to speak to allyship in those spaces. Snowball sampling methods were also utilized to work alongside campus community centers to get other participants and student leaders. I used an interpretive encoding approach, so I assessed the data as an array of various messages. And I want to shout out to the church that helped code this data and helped me code this data because it was a lot. 12 interviews, like I have to do a dissertation one day, and this was just 12 interviews, and I refused to do quantitative work. So that means I'm gonna have to do more interviews, but just 12 interviews like was a pain as far as coding goes. Like one interview was literally like 50 pages long on its own. And so took a lot of time to kind of get through the results. I also took a focused approach to the coding, where I specifically focused on the topic or issue of white racial allyship raised by the results of previous literature. And so specifically 4 major themes arose from the research participants. And specifically, because of my sampling, the participants were an even split, which was really, really awesome. So I had 6 graduate students and 6 undergraduate students, 6 participants identifying as men and 6 participants identifying as women. So the first theme that emerged, the first finding, was specifically asking Black voices to define allyship in their own words. And so for starters, Allyship from Black Voices is an unconditional and active support towards communities one does not identify with. If you'll bear with me, I have a ton of quotes here. But someone says, specifically participant Davion said, I think allyship boils down to being vigilant, kind, not just nice, but kind, considerate and adaptable in how you interact with people that do not look like you or have a different set of lived experiences that may not align with what you consider to be normal or what you're used to seeing. Others took different approaches to their understanding of allyship. Specifically, your allyship to a certain extent is just a title. What are you doing to help the next person? What are you doing to not be a hindrance? What are you doing to not be a barrier to someone? Again, allies talked about wholehearted support, unconditional support, and that support being multifaceted. So specifically, that support can look like financial support. It can look like physical support. It can also look like just upending the way you think internally, because that's ultimately going to come out in your actions, which I'll speak on. We also talked about consistency. So we think about this period of the Great Awakening, and all the white allies emerged. Everybody started a book club. Everybody was at the protests. Everybody wanted justice for George Floyd. We're 3 years, 4 years later, or at least when I was doing these interviews, we're 3 years later from this time period, and participants are asking, where are the white allies? Allyship is not a fair weather friend. You're supposed to be allies, especially if we're talking about allyship in the sense of community. You're supposed to also be in the trenches. It's not supposed to just be when everything is sunshine, rainbows, and safe. Sometimes allyship is using your privilege to not speak for, especially not speak for, but stand up for what is right. And then it goes right back around to social currency. Words mean things. Allyship already has a definition. Y'all need to put actions to that definition in order to be an ally. Participants talked about how allies have proper knowledge and understanding of the communities that they're being allied towards. I feel like allyship in general is understanding the problem and the issues at hand, figuring out how you contribute to those problems, and figuring out how you can fix those problems alongside working with the oppressed groups in a peaceful way, rather than including your own experiences to try to, I won't say to try to relate, but to try to make it seem as if you're being oppressed too. Understanding the problem, understanding how you contribute to the problem, and then understanding how you assist in relieving the problem without overstepping your boundaries. Allies value safety and care, always. Oftentimes we think about, so specifically these movements that arose from the deaths and murders of Black bodies. And thinking about how we value and value life and Black bodies all around to treat them with safety and care. M specifically said, I think everyone's goal in life is their own safety. So the goal still should be safety. Another said, from my personal standpoint, having my back. I think that's one of the core components of what I think about the actual definition. But I think for me personally, having my back, that's a big component. Allies exhibit a certain level of passion and commitment. I see allyship has a huge integrity component. And that came up several times. When I think of allyship, I think of passion. I think about how important is this to you? When I look at this person, this doesn't determine life or death for them. This doesn't determine their way of life. They could just leave this job right now and it wouldn't matter. It's just an occupation for you. I don't feel like it's important to you. And then you shouldn't do it in order to gain some type of recognition, because I feel like a lot of allies just did it for image instead of passion. So specifically when we think about passion, we think about, again, this transfer of power, this integrity that one might exhibit in their allyship. How do I carry myself on a daily basis as an ally, and how do I exhibit passion, genuine passion? Participants also spoke to downfalls and harms that allies have perpetuated. The most prominent specifically being institutional and interpersonal power dynamics. So oftentimes the allies that people came in contact with were typically those that either had power over them or had some sort of, again, familial relationship with, as to not try to start any trouble. I think sometimes it could be the amount of power that someone may hold in a relationship. For example, I've had white teachers make some comments that were not the best, but sometimes you might feel that if they're a teacher and you're the student, you might be out of line to correct them. Additionally, sometimes it may be because of familial relationships or close friendships or people that you will continually have to be around. And you don't want to, cause any turbulence in your relationship there. And so I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we as humans naturally want to have a good connection with people around us, especially by someone who can, grant you opportunities. Like my administration in high school, some of the recommendations I would have gotten for college came from them. So, it would be in my best interest to not want to piss them off in that regard. This equation of specifically teachers and administrators, school administrators, is another reason why I specifically kept my focus on undergraduate or college students. Students automatically, in a sense, equate their school administration or their teachers to being allies. And specifically thinking about the education that they receive, or the well-meaning education, students come into a space and automatically assume that because you have received an education, because you are the teacher, the administrator, you have made it this far, you have to know, right? Unfortunately, this is not always the case. Another student specifically talked about how he would argue with his history teacher each day, because his history teacher would just say outlandish things about history, making different comments that weren't realistic, were, either swaying reality in certain ways. We got into it numerous times where he has asked me to get out of his class a few times. I have refused, and he's called resource officers to escort me out of class. Other students said that they did not experience any physical harm, but they have dealt, again, with institutionalized harm. Like, I remember the Black History Month Club, it turned into a BSU at my school. And we were going through that process of trying to get it into an official club. We just had a lot of problems with administration being like, oh, it's going to make students feel uncomfortable and stuff like that. Additional findings speak about the lack of education, cultural competence, and self-awareness of white allies. and this is specifically also referenced in D'Angelo's work, specifically thinking about how a lot of white people are socialized in white circles. So I look at college, I think about how often do students, specifically even in my class, I've asked who all went to school with a bunch of black people in high school. Sometimes going to college is the first time students are interacting with people of color for the first time, members of the LGBTQIA2S plus community for the first time. And so this is a strain on, again, what we refer in sociologists as this habitus, this place of comfort, your social sphere. I think it goes without saying that we don't touch Black people's hair. Unfortunately, some of my participants had to explain to people that you don't touch my hair specifically. Lack of cultural competence and what hair means to Black people. With that, the downfall was, I think, she thought we were closer than we actually were. In that closeness, she felt comfortable touching my hair, and that's a different level of closeness where I'll allow you to touch my hair. Robin DiAngelo, specifically from our book, she speaks about how many white people lack genuine friendships and relationships with people of color. One day in my class, I asked all of my students, I don't know if I was supposed to do this or not, but how many black friends do you have? Everybody went down the board. How many? Yes. But so yeah, I asked all my students. Some of them had to think long and hard. Anybody get over 5? No. Genuinely, when we think about how many close Black friends or friends of color do you have in your circles, as a result, automatically, if all you have is 5 friends of color, you have 5 perspectives of color that you are limited to, and that's it. You have 5 tokenized friends, and that's probably about it as well. I think it's poor education. You can be an ally, but you can't have everybody explain to you what's wrong or what you said is wrong. You need to do some deep research on your own so you can actually be a part of the talk and conversation to fix it. You can't expect everybody to spoon feed you information. One of the, something that was really stood out to me is Grace stated, I'll say I'm very intersectional. I'll have a lot of different identities that overlap within other groups. So a lot of my racial justice is tied to feminism, is tied to LGBTQ, all of that type of stuff. So a lot of the times, I find myself in those other spaces. And while my identities are tied together and almost cannot be separated, other people feel the need to separate them. It's like, we're not talking about your Blackness, we're talking about your womanhood. But for me, that's the same thing that goes hand in hand for me. Along with a lack of education, specifically, is a miseducation. So again, you have 5 Black friends, 3 Black friends. Not only are you lacking education, you are going to be more or less miseducated. The dangers of nice white people. I guess a real thing where niceness and the front-facing niceness, there's still a bunch of unspoken ideological beliefs that people have been inundated with without realizing it. They take it all as to be truth and fact, and that's their baseline for understanding their social world. I know not everybody has unlearned and relearned and unpacked how they see the world. If I'm thinking about people's baselines being TVs, movies, and music and stereotypes that just float around, people just gather and people are understanding what they learn from other people who are also uninformed, misinformed, and then your niceness at the end of the day still means nothing to me until I hear you speak about certain things. So I spoke about gaslighting before, and this was another major thing. And again, referenced in white fragility, we think about gaslighting and the reluctance to admit fault. I believe that when we think about schooling, in our traditional means of schooling, we're taught that we have to get it right the first time, or that you just fail, right? That's kind of, you take a test, you take the test, you do it, you get your grade. Maybe if the teacher's nice, you might get a regrade, you might get some extra points. They don't do that in high school. I mean, they don't do that in college anymore. But specifically, we're taught that we have to get it right the first time. And as a result of that, our socialization typically ends up showing up as shutting down when we don't get it right the first time, because we've been ingrained that I have to get it right the first time or I have failed, rather than I have to keep trying to get it right or I'm a failure. We don't. So it's this idea of how we kind of actively, again, change our perspective to actively continue to try to get it right. You're never going to get it right every single day. And that's what specific participants spoke about. Someone said a reluctance to say I'm wrong. People don't like being wrong. In any case, saying that I was wrong or saying that I am wrong and I don't know is a difficult pill to swallow for any given person, for any given reason. The reluctance to say that I was wrong or I don't know the correct answer to this, that's another impeding factor. Others spoke about how many white Americans just do not want to admit any fault or acknowledgement, specifically in the history that we have emerged at today. And my favorite quote of all is, "The harm looks like gaslighting and I'm still in therapy." Retweet. Allies also, some of the harms include inaction, personal distancing, excusing behaviors. So specifically, we think about inaction. We think about how so not only do many white people not have genuine relationships with Black or peers of color, along with that, because this is just how demographics and population works, many people of color are constantly surrounded by white people. And they're taking notes and they're noticing when something is being said, when harm is being perpetuated, even if it's not by said friend. So in specific, someone talked about basically going over and hanging out with a friend and another friend. And while they were there, they started fighting. And the friend, mind you, the participants there is Black and then the two white friends arguing. They start fighting, right? And in the middle of the fight, one friend says, "I'm so glad I don't have to be friends with you anymore. You're so racist." Black person's in the corner like, "You brought me here? You brought me here. Like, that's your friend. You're supposed to be my friend, but now you're saying they're racist and you brought me into this space." Again, going back to safety. Distancing. So D'Angelo specifically talks about distancing. And there's There's a good quote. So I went, and while we're specifically a participant went out to protest with a colleague at another university. She said, yeah, white people tend to be kind of annoying in a lot of regards to things. But anyway, I went, and while we're there, she's like, oh, I wish there were more allies here. And I didn't really know her. Chapter 6 of D'Angelo's book. Does anybody remember chapter 6? Hmm?
Is that the one about anti-blackness, or is that the white women's tears?
Oh, the good old white tears and the pity parties. I think certain allies get a little defensive. And so you have to be strategic about the way that you do correct them. This is, again, from, this is noted and evidenced in D'Angelo's book. Even, you have to be strategic about the way you correct them, even when the statement is hurting us. I find it ironic that we're the ones having to make sure we deliver it in a way where they don't feel offended. But I think sometimes that's just the reality of what it is to be Black and involved in activism. M specifically, M was a fireball. M was the one that said the harm is gaslighting, and I'm still in therapy. M had a lot to say. I'm gonna abuse the hell out of you. And then the second you say something about it, I'm gonna cry. Automatic disgust. Not even rage, because rage would assume that, like, I care. But I'm disappointed. I'm not disappointed. I'm disgusted, because disappointed, I feel like that means I expected better. But to be honest, I expect nothing. But I'm disgusted by what I got. And thinking about the gaslighting, again, through the tears. And then the second they get called in, rather than taking corrective action, either doubling down or straight up just going to go into pieces. And it's like, no one said that you were a bad person. They said that the thing you did was harmful. It doesn't mean every single thing that you've done is harmful. It means that one thing was done was harmful. And then the lack of ability to approach these situations without whataboutism. Lastly, the harm we see in the white savior complex, social currency, microaggressions. M specifically said, if you cannot have a conversation about race and allyship without you being the hero, the savior, or the cure, again, you ain't over here for me. You're over here for you. I think a big one is that white counterparts don't realize they have a white savior complex. Like, I feel sometimes they will take initiatives in Black movements, but particularly in Black spaces. And I think it's important to recognize that as an ally, you're here to uplift the voices of the people who are marginalized, not to speak on their behalf. And so when I think when a social movement, justice movement happens where they're not centered, they naturally feel the need to gravitate towards the front. I think it's a historical thing where they're used to seeing themselves being the faces and being the center of certain movements. Despite all the harm, the biggest thing that I really wanted to emphasize from this study is, despite the harm that allies can perpetuate, I wanted the participants to speak to specifically the significance of white allies in movements for racial justice, because they are absolutely necessary and pivotal. They're very important. The system was built by them. They're the only ones that can help destroy the old system without it being deemed as violent, if that makes sense. Crazy comparison, but for example, the White House raid. They really let them walk through the door. I was like, what the hell? So thinking about the privilege and power to amplify voices as a point of that significance. There's privilege there, and those who are in power, those who are enacting much of these racial injustices are white people. And so, by being a white person, I think in proximity, that's going to be helpful for you as you contribute to your work of doing contributions to racial justice or rectifying racial injustices. The significance of white allyship stems from access and advocacy. So, I'd say as someone who has grown up in predominantly white spaces, they're very important in my life, even though they have caused a lot of harm. I found that a lot of tranquility and a lot of the support I found has been by white counterparts just because other white people are more likely to listen to white people in the first place. White allies also, whereas allies are there to listen and learn and empathize, white allies also offer social insights to the communities that they are allied with. Interestingly enough, again, as a result of these harms, many people viewed white allies and their significance related to networking and the resources and power that they can provide. I do think if there was enough of us collaborating together, it's not something that would be much as a necessity and more than just an extra tool. It's good for getting ahead, especially in corporate worlds. Any job that has a ladder to be climbed, it's typically going to be good for you to be interacting and befriending and such things like that with white counterparts. And once you get into those positions, you can help other Black people. You can share the knowledge that you've gained from that. So putting more of that white wealth in the Black communities and into the Black community circulation is really good. Lastly, allies offer strength in numbers. I think they're a necessity only because, as I said earlier, there's not enough Black people willing to come together to put in the work to do what needs to be done. And because of that, the people who are willing to do what needs to be done, they have to use that to their advantage. And I think that can be an advantage. As I close, the last kind of major finding were opportunities for improvement. As we think about, again, the harm that can be perpetuated, the significance that is clear, we think about opportunities for improvement because of this significance. First, we think about conceptualizing racial harm as violence. So back to my participant who went to the protest with her colleague that said, "Where are all the white allies?" She goes, and then she tells me, I believe with everything they do except the violent revolution or something like that. And I just like, why are you telling me? It's more like, why are you telling me this? I don't agree with violence. That's what a lot of people say. Like, I believe in racial justice, but not violence. But not seeing racial harm as violence, not seeing poverty or structural poverty and systematic inequality as like inherent violence against Black people and stuff. But physically harming someone, that's a big no. Although there are Black people being physically harmed by environmental problems, it's all the same. It's the same thing. So that was like a moment where I just had to put distance between us. So really understanding and putting the same energy and effort behind the way we conceptualize violence. Many people will say, I agree in racial justice, but I don't agree with violence. But yet we constantly, specifically white allies in the system of race in America, often benefit from racial violence that harms Black people daily. The most important thing also is recognizing racial injustice as a white problem. I do think they're quite significant, but the problem is, like I said, what's your focus? What's your goal? If your goal is social currency, then this is an attempt to crumble. If your goal is to enact change, I'm not saying stop interacting with Black people. I'm saying continue to call out injustice. And again, what are you doing in the voting booth? What are you doing at home? What are you doing in your community? That is dismantling the system, right? Because whatever you need to do, it doesn't always need to be done in my face. Lori specifically says, I think they're incredibly important. I don't think racial injustice can be eliminated until white people recognize that racism is a white problem and not a problem that Black people face, that they're just there to empathize with and go about their day, when it's quite literally the structure that they benefit from that's causing the harm. Allies receive ongoing education because allies, again, understand and are knowledgeable of the communities that they face. Allies understand that you don't get it right the first time, you might not get it right the second time. Hey, you might get it right the first time, you might get it wrong the second time, but it's always actively pushing towards being equitable. Again, like was said earlier, what are you doing to not be a hindrance? What are you doing to not be a harm? What are you doing to identify the system that you benefit from, but also help others benefit as well? Listening without participating was a big piece of advice. Stop relating your experiences to ours. That is a big one. Saying that you understand or you know exactly how I feel when you don't, that is not a part of being an ally. I think those are some of the biggest ones. I have a professor specifically who's from Italy. We had some issues in our course one time regarding a guest speaker and race. My professor said, I understand how you feel. I'm not from here. I said, you're a white woman. Yeah, you're from Italy, but you're a white woman. So relating these experiences and understanding place and space and position, that individual did not understand their place, their space, their position. Listening without participating. Sometimes participation of white counterparts in certain Black spaces and events makes the experiences for Black students and in certain and Black people feel either less authentic or feel less safe to be authentic. Sometimes entering those spaces like roundtable talks and things like that and just sitting and listening and then showing appreciation after and just taking in that information is good. I think from the allies that I feel like are doing good with their allyship, a lot of things they do is just go into spaces and they just listen and intake. And I feel like it gives them, honestly, a really good perspective. Not like fishbowl watching, but like, I'm getting invited to dinners and I'm just having regular conversations with people and not necessarily putting in my opinion, but more asking for theirs. And not just being open to listening to people, because people tend to be very excited about sharing their culture and customs and things like that. So just listening to them. Lastly, think about avoiding white saviorism as the final piece of advice. White counterparts absolutely integral to dismantling the system that they are part of. I'm not saying don't educate yourself, don't do the research. I'm asking, what is the purpose of coming back to tell me what you've learned about? Not me, but Black people in general. Do not tokenize the Black people around you. Don't colonize your Black friends. Don't claim that you're an ally by saying, hey, look at my boyfriend. Hey, look at the Black people that I have in my circle. That's just weird. But instead, showcase the things you've done to actually support those people in your lives. Lastly, when you're seeing people on the internet being brutalized, check in on your Black peers. Try not to reshare. It was a piece of advice. While many of the conclusions that were drawn from participants were mostly positive in seeking and thinking about the future trajectory of allyship. One thing I also took note of is that when I do my interviews, I start out with demographic information. I think through how might one's demographic information inform some of their answers. And so particularly, there were a couple of students when they talked about their interactions with white allies that said that they limit the amount of time that they spend around white allies as a result of said harm, and as a reaction to that. And so, whereas many people said that white allies are significant, they also talked about the fact that they are significant, but again, there needs to be work done to upend the way one thinks on their own. And so, ultimately, in conclusion, the study really reifies this idea that racial harm perpetuated by white allies and movements for racial equity and justice, it takes place, and it's something that we have to actively be involved in combating constantly. However, beyond racial harm, the significance of white allies in this movement is notably championed. It's absolutely pivotal, necessary. We can, and again, it means a transfer of power, but not a total relinquishment of it. It means that we share power. It means that we share seats, because they're enough. Yes. In highlighting both of these aspects of white racial allyship, this study brings awareness to white counterparts, specifically of the possible harms and downfalls that can be perpetuated, while also reiterating the potentially significant role in bringing forth social change and social justice through allyship. I have a ton of quotes here. I have 19 pages worth of quotes, but I just want to say thank you again all for letting me share this information with you. As we close, I recently did a poster presentation of my research this past Wednesday. The poster is in Drysdale Hall. So for anyone afterwards that wants to view the poster, there's some more quotes and kind of brief findings of that. I'd be happy to answer any questions at any point, but those are my findings, and I just again want to thank you all for your time.
Thank you for being here, Davion. And I invite us now to rise in body or spirit and share hymn 300 with heart and mind. as our service draws to a close, we extinguish the flame of our chalice as we share these words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we hold in our hearts until we are together again. And Zoomies, let's wave goodbye to people here. It's been wonderful being together, Roomies. Wave goodbye to our Zoomies. Go for it, Emily. So our benediction is a variation on the Jewish scripture in Deuteronomy 6:11, and it was adapted by the Reverend Peter Rabel. We build on foundations we did not lay. We warm ourselves by fires we did not light. We sit in the shade of trees we did not plant. We drink from wells we did not dig. We profit from persons we did not know. This is as it should be. Together we are more than any one person could be. Together we can build across the generations. Together we can renew our hope and faith in the life that is yet to unfold. Together we heed the call to a ministry of care and justice. We are ever bound in community, and yet always be so. And join us in the social hall. Davion will be there if you want to chat with him or